Hey everyone, Temporal here, and for this session we are going to be looking at NACE. We're going to be looking at their Overwatch Star League, that's their varsity league, the highest level of competition, and we will be looking at the regions that are in play. We're sort of going to be rating them based off of strength, looking at them, going, is this a tough region, an easy region? This is a week where it was an off week for Homecoming, so we've got nothing going on here, and NACE's Star League, or NACE, is probably this season the largest third party organizer. There's other contenders for that title, of course. NECC is doing competitive Overwatch stuff. We've seen ESC do competitive Overwatch stuff, UGC stuff. But for this season, for this session, we're going to be looking at NACE and what they've done this season. So we can see there's 10 different regions that they created, and let's see what's happened in these regions, as well as what's the strongest, what's the weakest, what's going on here. So first things first, we'll go ahead and take a look at the coaches poll. This was done by a poll of 10 coaches, people around the scene of the teams, to just determine in all of the Star League what are the 10 toughest teams. And these are not teams that are in the same regions right now. So mostly these teams are not playing each other. Some of them might be. For example, Waldorf and Lords are in the same region. That's where Lords' one loss comes from Waldorf there. But mostly these teams are spread out between the different regions. So we're going to have an interesting question of how strong are these regions. So let's start by looking at the Northeast 2 region. And if we take a look at the Northeast 2 region, we can immediately see that it's got Harrisburg, and it's also got Bryant Stratton College. And Bryant Stratton College, I did not see in Homecoming. I could have just missed them. It's an absolute pain to search for things on the site, on the Game Battle site when you're looking for things. But the Bobcats aren't a nothing team. They did in a NECC tournament, in a local NECC tournament, beat Waldorf so rather recently. So Waldorf, as we see, made our coaches pull for a top 10 team here. So if the Bobcats beat them, and then we take a look at this region, and we see this region has 9 teams, it looks like. It has Harrisburg, who are known. Harrisburg, obviously, we'd think of them as a top team. They've beat Ohio State, Irvine, UC Santa Cruz, Waldorf. They've lost to Bay State and Northwood. That's a team that we would look at and go, hey, this is a top team, a top 6 team, really, possibly better than that. But in our power rankings that we've done here on this channel before, they make top 6, and they sort of round out as one of the monster teams or contender teams. And contenders in this case does not mean tier 2 Overwatch contenders. That's a different league entirely. But they would be one of the contenders to win it all, with the most likely outcome to win it all, of course, being Redbirds. So we see this, 9 schools in it. One really, really good school. One, okay, this is meaningful school, but they've picked up another loss to someone else here. We could try and figure out who they've picked that loss up to, and it was to the Arcadia Knights, and it was over a no-show. Bit of a pain. Those things do happen. This is collegiate athletes where, maybe something couldn't happen. They couldn't get someone there. Maybe there was a fire alarm. Maybe something came up. Whatever the case may be, if you can't field your roster, that does occasionally happen if you can't reschedule. So we'll see. Looks reasonable. Next, we'll move on to our next region, and our next region here is going to be Northeast 1. We started with Northeast 2. We'll do Northeast 1 here. We're working backwards. Why not? We see Northeastern is in this region. Northeastern has gone 8-0 there. We know Northeastern is a solid school. They make, obviously, the top 10 in these power rankings and a wider collegiate power rankings that isn't just limited to schools competing in NACE. I put them around number 12, maybe a little bit better than that, but about in that area. So we then go through here. This one's a little bit weird. Ontario Tech, which is this school here, did get top 32 last season in Blizzard's main tournament. But then they picked up a couple losses here. So something went wildly wrong. I can tell you they battled Northeastern a bit, but something went wrong there. They picked up losses elsewhere. Maybe it was no-shows. Maybe it was collegiate stuff. Who knows? And then the next best team in here would be WolfieNet. WolfieNet is also 6-2, so we have 3 6-2 teams in here right now. That's been an interesting game of musical chairs. And WolfieNet this season, it was 4-4 in Homecoming before they dropped out. So looks like like there's 9 teams in this region, like there was 9 teams in the previous region, and we can see that this one probably doesn't look quite as competitive. Northeastern, good solid school, couldn't in good faith call it as strong as Harrisburg when it comes to Overwatch. Could call it stronger than Harrisburg academically, easily, but couldn't call it as strong as Harrisburg in Overwatch. Bobcats, give them a reasonable number 2 team in this division. Reasonable number 2 team in this division would probably be OTSU. This is just, these are all 6-2 teams. Wolfienet is a 4-4 team, probably isn't that. That said, OTSU did pick up 2 losses, 1-2 Northeastern and 1-2 New Haven, which was weird. New Haven sure didn't seem like a team that should have beat OTSU when we played against them, but that's life. The secondary team in here does look to be OTSU, and overall, this region does not look as strong as the Northeast 2 region. Then we get into our Eastern region. And if we take a look at our Eastern region, this is Bay State. Bay State is another top 6 team. Those are the contenders, the champion, the people that could potentially win it all. But things behind that look a little less impressive. First off, we see 3 buys in this region. So this region maybe at one point had a lot of teams, had 10 teams. Now it is down to 7 teams. It looks like 3 teams dropped out here. That's not really what you want. That's not good, especially one of these teams dropped out mid-season when they were 4-4. That just messes everything up. So that's not great. But the teams behind this, in terms of potentially being competitive, are going to be Cornell and RIT Orange, which is Rochester Institute of Technology. I really can't tell you anything about Cornell other than what we see here in terms of, hey, we see the record. Did they get a win over Rochester? That would be interesting to us. We see Bay State beat Rochester here. We see Bay State beat Cornell here. Have we seen these two match up yet? That's really what we're looking for. And the answer to that is yes. Cornell beat Rochester Institute of Technology 3-2, so they got a narrow win there in round 7. We're currently on round 8, heading into round 9, for those that aren't aware. And so they did get that win. They are better. Rochester Institute of Technology, in terms of when we look about their achievements outside of NACE here, we do see that they beat Ashland Esports. They lost to Boise, UC Santa Cruz, and Rebel Gaming. Boise is a 7-1 team. They also are in Homecoming. Boise is also on NACE's top 10 list. We're trying. There we go. We also are aware that, what was I saying? Boise was on the top 10 list. We know UC Santa Cruz and Boise are both 7-1 in Homecoming, and Rebel Gaming is 6-2, and it lost to those 3 schools. So that gives us a bit of a feel for where they sit, and then the Cornell is just a little bit better than them. And Bay State, we very much know where Bay State sits. Bay State is one of the best teams in Collegiate Overwatch. Okay, so that tells us about the strength here. Absolutely has a very, very serious potential contender to win it all in this region, in the Eastern region here for NACE's Star League. And then it's got 2 reasonable teams behind it. These teams are not, oh my goodness, terribly impressive from what we see here. Again, the RIT Orange here is looking at themselves I believe they were a 5-3. I believe they were 5-3. Maybe 6-2. I believe they were 5-3 in Homecoming. So it's not like the secondary teams behind this team are amazing, but we haven't seen amazing secondary teams really behind in any of our regions yet. The primary teams, we've had 2 very strong ones. Sorry guys, it keeps jumping back here to the current round. Very strong teams for 2 of these regions in the first one. A strong team, but not at the same level in this third region here. And then the secondary teams have all been probably a little weaker here than in these 2. Maybe that's not even fair. The secondary teams have all been pretty even in terms of how they're holding up there. Then we move on to our next region, which is going to be the West region. Over here we have Boise State, and then we have abbreviations that no one understands. Fortunately, we've pre-decoded those. We have Grand Canyon University, who are 5-3 in homecoming. They have losses to University of Washington, University of Toronto Blue, and Carnegie Mellon Catgirls, because of course they do, because that's totally a real mascot. And then we have EAUCD, which is UC Davis. UC Davis has losses to Mystery Machine and Northeastern in homecoming. So we see that. We see, okay, Boise State is the lead team here. These two states have something to them. These two teams have something to them. We're looking at a 6-2 team and a 5-3 team as the second and third teams in this region. 6-2 and 5-3 in homecoming as the second and third team in this NACE region. So that tells us something. Ultimately, neither of these teams are really going to be a challenge for Boise. Boise, based on what we know, doesn't really look like it competes at quite the level of Bay State or Harrisburg, but is a good, strong school, like Northeastern is a good, strong school, and there's a couple real competitors behind this in this region. And then once again, we have, unlike this region, oh, that's not what we wanted. We want to go back to matches and standings. Unlike this region, which went down to 7 schools, this region is still healthy at its 9 schools in our western region here. So then we move on through, and now we are in the South. And in our South region, we see University of Texas Dallas is 8-0, and University of North Texas is 7-1 behind them. And okay, those are real. We know that University of Texas Dallas generally makes our top 6, similar to some of those others. And then we know University of North Texas last season finished Blizzard's tournament in the best of 16 round before going out, and this season they are currently 6-2 with losses to Northeastern twice and a loss to SCAD. So okay, that's a pretty solid secondary team. That's a pretty darn solid secondary team. That's a good lead team. Really nothing to complain about in this region. And then it's got 9 teams behind it. It doesn't necessarily have a super strong third school here. If we look at Blinn, we can see that Blinn did get 3-0'd by UNT, the number 2 team. We don't really know anything more than that about Blinn. And we see, again, 9 teams in this one. Nothing too wild. That tells us what we need to know about the South. So next we're going to move on, and we are going to look at our Midwest 3 region. So we're going to have 3 different Midwest regions. We see we've got Waldorf University and Lords. And if we go back here, we see that Waldorf in the coaches poll power ranking is ranked number 8, and Lords is ranked number 10. Well, that's interesting. We look at this and go, hey, that's interesting. We've got 2 of the top 10 schools in the same region. That potentially makes it a contender for the top region, except there's a couple problems with that. Even though it's got, how many schools did we end up with? 11 schools in this region, which is more than the 9 average that we've been seeing in most of them. And we've got 2 schools that are both in the top 10 in this region. We do run into the reality that while Waldorf has beat Lords, did get a win against Bay State, but has since lost to Bay State, did get a win against Northeastern and University of Washington. It actually lost to Bay State twice after that, excuse me. It's also lost to Harrisburg, and then those BSC Bobcats, who were, again, over here in our first region of Northeast 2. So they lost in a local tournament hosted by NECC, I believe it was, that was, they became the final 2, and they got second place to the Bobcats' first place. So that's a little bit of a bad news for them, and it potentially makes us scratch our head a little bit maybe at power rankings here, but sometimes power rankings go, hey, I don't care what the match was, that was a super weak day for Waldorf, we've seen them, they're usually better than that, or hey, Bobcats need to prove that they can continue to play up to that level. Maybe that's what's going into how other people are ranking these teams. So that, again, could be strong argument. We've got 2 top 10 teams in here. We've got 11 teams in here. Don't have anything too strong behind them. The Jayhawks, of course, did beat UW Stout, but they then did pick up their second loss here. They have 2 losses. They have one of their losses to one of these top 2 teams, and their next loss to this MBU Overwatch team, who we don't really know anything about them, but they're not going to be a top team. So, okay, if you're able to drop to teams that aren't a top team, That's not really a good sign for you. And then UW Stout, we've taken a look at them, and we've seen that they're 6-2 in homecoming. They lost to Longhorn Gaming, who's another 6-2 team, so that's not a big deal. But then they also lost to Overwatch Red, which is a 4-4 team. So that's again not really a good sign. They're capable of dropping, even if they're okay, to teams who really aren't so great. So definitely some argument for this to be a tough region, a top region, but I think it would be tough to call it the best region based on what we see here. Obviously, there's multiple ways we could think of the best region, guys. I didn't really preface that. If we just went, hey, the best region is the region with the single best team in it, and that is going to be the region that Northwood is in. That's not really a surprise to anyone. The Redbirds aren't in NACE. They've sent their JV team or their club team to NACE, but they themselves did not put their main roster in NACE. So Northwood would be the best team, and Northwood does have wins against, I believe, all of the other top four all of these top four teams behind them now. So Bay State, Harrisburg, and Dallas. I can confirm that. Northwood beat University of Texas Dallas, Maryville, Harrisburg, Northeastern. Yeah, looks like they don't necessarily have a Redbirds one there. Excuse me, I know they don't have a Redbirds win, obviously. I was looking for a Bay State, which I thought they had at this point in the season, but it's possible that they haven't directly met up with each other. Yeah, doesn't look like it based on my notes. Okay, cool. So we're not going with, hey, which region has the single strongest team in it to determine the strongest region. That would be boring. It would be the region that Northwood is in. We are looking for something that is a little more densely packed, is a little more hotly contested for, hey, the top team is good, but then that second, third, fourth team, we've got the most strength behind it, just because it makes this more interesting. Okay, so next we move on, and we are going to be in Midwest 2, because again, we have 3 Midwest regions here. And for Midwest 2, we've got Mizzou Esports and Ashland Esports. And Mizzou has been good in the past. I don't think Mizzou is a absolute top school this season. I thought I'd already pulled up notes on Mizzou, but it looks like my notes are incomplete there. So we see Mizzou. Mizzou is 6-2, and if we take a quick look at Mizzou, we can see that, okay, we've got these. Their losses are early. University lost to UT, University of Texas Dallas. No shame in that whatsoever. Lost to Illinois Orange. That's going to be a little more meaningful. That school's sort of more in the thick of things in terms of how they go. In fact, we can look at their record and see that. And we can see that they are, in fact, a team that is also 6-2, and we can see who they've sort of won and lost against. And this isn't like a super impressive team to be losing to. This school's done fine, but this is not like a absolute top player in any way compared to, it's a 6-2 team compared to what we've seen from the leaders of our other regions, where again, we can look at this and go, hey, we are very much aware that Texas Dallas is a very good school. We are very much aware that Boise is a good Overwatch school, that Bay State could, in theory, win it all type thing. That again, we could see Northeastern. Northeastern's not really positioned to win it all, but you can see them making plays from the outside, that sort of thing. They could potentially take down someone you might expect to win it all. And then very similar thing that you would say about again, HU Storm, potentially in a position to win it all, similar to Boise, where Boise's probably not going to win it all, but could make some moves, could take someone out who you might have expected to win it all. That said, when we get to Mizzou, that's really not in the cards for them. Waldorf, sure, similar position to Boise or Northeastern, same with Lords, but then when we get to Mizzou, I really don't think that's a defensible stance that they could win it all or that they're really going to be making powerful moves on someone who's going to win it all. Ashland is weird. Ashland I specifically pulled up because Ashland seems to be entered in the Game Battles tournament twice, once where they are 1-1, and then once where they are 6-0. So I assume this was something that they had to do to get control of their roster because it was registered through someone who wouldn't release it or something like this. I don't know what happened there. Maybe it's the tournament organizers being weird. But you can see we are 8 rounds in and they are 6-0 here, and that doesn't make sense. And then we have a separate entry for Ashland Esports, who are 1-1. So I think probably what we're actually looking at is Ashland Esports is 7-1. Okay, that's interesting. That's the team behind Mizzou. If we look at Ashland in terms of what they've accomplished, we can see that they lost to Rochester. And again, that Rochester Institute of Technology thing, that's interesting because we were looking at that. That was the Rit Orange who beat Ashland Esports, lost to Boise, lost to University of Santa Cruz, Rebel Gaming, a 6-2 team. So okay, that's interesting, but again, this doesn't look like a championship level team. It's okay as a second place team for one of these regions, absolutely, but with Mizzou as the first place team and Ashland is the second place team, and then 3 dropouts here, 3 buys in this one, I think this probably takes the cake for the weakest region of the ones that we've seen so far. But hey, we'll move on. So now we move on to Midwest 1. And as we look at Midwest 1, Northwood is in here. Well, Northwood being in here, if we're just going to say the team with the strongest school is going to be the toughest region, then Midwest 1 would win that debate at this point in time. And that is totally a fair way to look at it. But it's not what we're going to look at this time. So instead, we'll go ahead and look at the next schools on here. And we see Ohio State University, Akron Esports, Illinois Overwatch, and ISU Academy. And ISU Academy is the Redbirds sort of JV team, club team, however you want to think about that. And they're 5-3. They've beat all the teams down here effectively. They haven't beat any of the teams above them. They've been losing to the teams above them. And if we look at round 9, we can see that they will be up against Northwood, so they will be losing this next match against Northwood. We can see that they already lost to Akron. We can see that they already lost to Illinois Overwatch there. And we can see that, was that all the teams above them? Did they just then beat everything else? I think they did. Ohio State should have beat them in the first round. Yeah, and then Ohio State beat them in the first round. So, okay, middle of the table team. That said, it's kind of the team that, they actually brought in a completely fresh roster to go ahead and be their competition this year. This team, before they brought in this contenders roster to be their competition, was actually a top 32 team, I believe, last year in the last season of Overwatch. So now we look at this and see, okay, look at this region. We see Northwood on top. We see Ohio State, and Ohio State did make the top 10 list, so that's a second top 10 team in here. Number 6 rated team, number 1 rated team. I don't rate Ohio State as number 6 in all of Overwatch. I certainly wouldn't rate them that high, but I would rate them in the top 10 in the Star League, because not every single Overwatch team is competing in, well, any tournament. For example, we didn't find the Bobcats, who look like they might be a reasonably good team, beat Waldorf here in the Homecoming tournament, but maybe they're there and I missed them. There's other teams that we've certainly not found that simply aren't in the Homecoming tournament while they're competing in some other Overwatch league. So that's interesting. Overall in Overwatch, they wouldn't make it, but they make this top 10 list, and they wouldn't be far outside the top 10 in a general top 10 ranking. So that's pretty solid as a secondary team. And then we've got Akron, and I can give some quick details on Ohio State, I suppose. Ohio State did beat Pennsylvania State and Akron. They lost to Waterloo. They're 7-1 in Homecoming. Whereas Akron, if we want to scroll down to them, they beat CU Boulder. They lost to Ohio State, and they lost to Illinois Orange. Which that Illinois Orange set up, that Illinois Orange thing is going to be a thing, and that's these guys right here. And they've sort of been around. Remember, we talked about how they beat Mizzou. They're kind of in the middle there. So, okay, maybe these rankings are wrong in terms of which team is better, and we will see in round 9 that maybe there's an important matchup here. Does Akron have a loss scheduled? Akron probably has a loss scheduled to Ohio State University here. So that would explain why they're different in the standings here. But That said, Akron is 7-1, while Illinois Orange is 6-2 in homecoming. But we know Illinois Orange beat Akron here, so we've got that strength differential. That said, both pretty darn solid teams, and then they've got ISU Academy behind it, who aren't by any means rock stars. They aren't in any way like, oh, this is some great, fantastic team. But they probably would play at a similar level based on what we've seen in some of these two. Let me just go a school that I can recognize. They probably would play at a similar level to, say, UC Davis, who was the number 3 school in Boise's region. So in Boise's region, which was the West tier. So that does add some nice prop up to the strength of this region, just as an extra little tick. And then in terms of the number of schools in this region, we have 9 schools, 1 school dropped out here. So this has probably been the strongest region we've seen so far, both because it is the single strongest school and because we really go 4 deep on reasonably strong schools, maybe even 5 deep on reasonably strong schools. Whereas most of them are going 2 to 3 schools deep on reasonably strong schools, and while they might have a school in the same power tier as Northwood, they're not having this many solid schools behind it. So far this takes the cake, and we have, what, 2 schools behind here? So we have 2 more regions to check out. So let's check out our last 2 regions. Have you done East Division? I have, and I'll jump back to it in just a second. Let me get through these 2 regions, and then I'm happy to talk about East region again, but I'd like to sort of wrap up the main part of the video first. So now we get to Southeast 2, and as we look at our Southeast 2 region, we see Converse is on top, Winthrop is in the second spot, and KSU Black is in the third spot. And those matter to a degree. We're in our Southeast 2 region, and you know what? We can talk about Georgia Tech as well. They're a 6-2 team. So Converse, they're currently 6-2 in homecoming. They did lose to Bay State, no shame in that, and SCAD. That's a little more interesting, decisive of a matchup. But they've beat Winthrop, KSU Black, and UC San Diego. UC San Diego from homecoming, KSU Black, and Winthrop in here. The interesting things about that is, again, they're 6-2, whereas Winthrop and KSU Black are both 7-1 in homecoming. So Converse is the better school, which potentially suggests that either these two had bad days in their matchup against Converse here, or Converse had good days, or Winthrop and KSU Black are both looking a little bbit soft and are probably going to run into a little more trouble in the final 2 rounds of homecoming, while Converse probably has a windfall ahead of them and may finish 8-2. These guys might not be in the shape to finish 8-2. They might be cruising to 7-3, or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll be just fine and they'll finish 8-2 or even 9-1 themselves. But we will see. Again, Converse 6-2 in homecoming. Winthrop and KSU Black both 7-1. Winthrop's meaningful matchups are they've beat OU Crimson, they lost to Waterloo and Converse. KSU Black has lost to Bay State and Converse. Can't really be too upset about any of those. That doesn't really tell us that KSU Black is weak, other than they're weaker than Converse here. Then if we look at Georgia Tech, because we do have a 4th school here, I would look at them and say, hey, they're 6-2. They lost to Akron and Rit Orange again. Oh, that school that keeps coming up there. They're kind of in the middle of the rankings, useful with some of the things that they've beat, lost to, that sort of thing. And we look at that and go, hey, that's reasonable to call that a 4th reasonable school in this region. So we've got 1 school, Converse, 6-2, not super highly rated in terms of my power rankings, in terms of NACE's power rankings, in terms of the NACE's coaches poll power rankings. I actually do select them as my number 10 school when I submit. Full disclosure, I am one of the 10 coaches polled for these power rankings here. You guys can follow this. We can actually do this here if you want. You can see the 10 people who vote in this poll, and we can see that for Overwatch, here are the people who are voting in the poll. And yes, I do work at Northeastern. Nothing too shocking there. I'm in the list here. That said, where was I going with this? They did not make the top 10. I think they should make the top 10. I think it's a mistake that they don't, and I actually think it's reasonable to call this region reasonably strong. I think what we're really looking at here is these 2 schools probably aren't quite as strong as their homecoming records may suggest, combined with, hey, Converse is good in this region, maybe doesn't have a king. Like, Converse is good, but it doesn't have the king the way that some of these regions have a a Harrisburg or a Bay, oh come on, load, or a Bay State or a Northwood type thing. So solid region, definitely stronger than what we saw here in terms of Midwest 2. Does not, in my mind, come out as strong as the Midwest 1 region here. And then we'll move on to our last region, just to round this out. And we'll look at this, and I'm going to call this the weakest region. I'm going to definitively call this the weakest region right here, and this is the Southeast 1 region. And these schools mostly, hey, what is this? What are we looking at? GMU Team A is George Mason University. This is about a 4.2K team. Natter does some coaching for this team. Natter has picked up and coached some of the collegiate teams, just like I've picked up and coached some of the collegiate teams. For those of you that don't know Natter, he's a former contenders coach like myself. He'll sometimes stream his coaching of this team and other teams on Twitch. And this is one of the teams that he coaches. They're about 4.2, and as you can see, they're not actually the number 2 team in this region. They're the number 1 team in this region. 4.2 is not particularly strong for Collegiate. 4.2 wouldn't really be expected to make top 32 even anymore in Collegiate. So these guys are the leader. You see Shandala is ahead of them here, but Shandala is 9-1, and Shandala is only ahead of them because they've effectively played one extra match here. The reality is this is a better score, and GMU beat Shandala here. So GMU A is the bleed team here. They're about a 4.2K team. That's not really good enough. Now, I'm not telling you, oh, yes, they're important, huge matchups that have happened, that sort of thing, but like, we can look at this and go, no one here has important matchups. No one here has important matchups where they got wins against teams outside of this region. So I'm going to be mean, whatever you want to call it, and say this is probably pretty definitively the weakest region, and whoever gets fed the winner of this region when we head into the playoffs here is probably going to have a happy time in their first round in who they're going to get to beat up on here. So, looking at this in review, I'd probably say the weakest region here was going to be our Southeast 1 region. The strongest region was probably going to be the Midwest 1 region. I like what I see. I like the scrappiness that I see in this region. We've got a sort of tightly contested region here. I don't think we have a strong enough king for me to call this the for this to make an argument to be the strongest region. I really don't think we can do that, but I do like the scrappiness here. The lack of separation here is pretty solid in terms of, hey, these schools are close to each other, which perhaps makes it a tough region if you're in the middle of it. So I'll give them a bit of an honorable mention, though obviously I say obviously. The reality is Converse is not as strong as some of the other schools that we'd get to. Likewise, if I had to pick a school also on the low end, like I sort of picked 2 schools that were, one school that was actually like, hey, this is an actual top region, which was our Midwest 1 region. And then I picked the one that I called our bottom region, which I am, in fact, yes, going to call our Southeast 1 region here, and then we can sort of go with our, hey, we've got our scrappy Southeast 2 region here. I like it. And then another one where if we're picking on the lower side, I'm going to call this another relatively weak region where Mizzou's a fine school. Mizzou has been a consistent, regular playoff school in Overwatch. I do not mean to be like, oh, Mizzou's terrible. They're absolutely not terrible. But I do believe they graduated their best player or lost their best player. And when we look at their record, they're like them being the top of a region. Ashland is a 7-1 team with a weird loss to them. Really, this does not look like a terribly strong region either. That said, I would expect this region to beat the other region that we talked about here, which was our Southeast 1 region here. So that's sort of what I do in sort of maybe top 2, bottom 2. Maybe I wouldn't strictly call our second region there our second top region. I think we could also make an argument that, hey, this region looks pretty okay, but again, can't really do it when Waldorf is currently the king of this region, and they took a loss to the Bobcats over here. I think we'd have a better argument for this being like a number 3 region type thing. So that's what we're looking at. If you guys have questions, you can throw them up in chat now. If you're enjoying this type of content, please do drop a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. And let me know in the comments if you want to see more collegiate style content like this. I thought we had a break from homecoming. This would be a good thing to go check out here. Here's another competitive region that we liked here, the East region. Neb asks, have you done East Division? Yes, I did do East Division, Neb, and I would consider this a competitive region. I think there'd be. I can't put this as like the number 2 competitive region, even though this has an effective king in Bay State here, and then it's got 2 pretty solid schools behind it. Not like, oh my goodness, amazing. These guys are the best when we look at Rit Orange and, let me pull them back up, Cornell here. Red Orange does have, again, that win against Ashland, lost to Boise, UC Santa Cruz, Rebel Gaming. Rebel Gaming was 6-2. Boise and UC Santa Cruz were both 7-1 in homecoming. But we're a bit of a light region here with the number of dropouts that we had. So we had a high number of dropouts in this region. These schools are good, but not like absolutely amazing. We have a king. I think I do have to ultimately give it to our previous region over here, like I said, which would be our Midwest 1 region. And then our sort of honorable mention is once again going to be our Southeast 2 region here. Yeah, yeah. So I hope you guys enjoyed that one. Again, if you enjoyed it, please do drop the likes, consider subscribing, all that good stuff, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks, Tempora.